Thank you, Brandon, for telling us about the gains and losses of this failed invasion. I'm Jack-grp3 and I'm here to tell you about the aftermath of this whole situation and the numerous effects it had. So, how did this failure affect the group culture? After the results of the Bay of Pigs invasion came in as a failure, John F. Kennedy was stuck wondering how it could have all gone wrong. In the article, The Lesson John Kennedy Learned from the Bay of Pigs by Hugh Sidey, which appeared in Time magazine on April 16th of 2001, Sidey recalls a conversation he had with Kennedy weeks after the invasion. In regards to the failure, Kennedy says, "I want to know how this all could have happened. There were 50 or so, presumably the most experienced and smartest people to plan such an operation. Most of us thought it would work. I know there are some men now saying they were opposed from the start. I wasn't aware of any great opposition." What this shows us is that the group started to turn on one another when the result came out as a failure. I'm sure that if the result was a success, then everyone involved would have taken responsibility for it. However, since this wasn't the case, people tried to deny the responsibility by saying, "I knew it wasn't going to work out," after the fact of the matter. It also shows us that there may have been an avoiding conflict style during the process. If members of the group truly did not want this to happen, then they should have spoken up. Instead, they decided to avoid conflict overall and let it happen without argument, and it didn't work out. So what happened to the leader of this whole operation? Well, as you may already know, the leader of this situation was John F. Kennedy. Although he didn't work alone, as he worked with the Central Intelligence Agency and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was the one that had to approve the plan in the first place for it all to happen. Kennedy didn't really face any repercussions for the failed invasion, though. One would think that his approval rating would have gone down right after it came out that the United States sponsored this event. However, Kennedy actually saw an increase in his approval rating in the following weeks of failure. We can see this in the chart provided by David Coleman in his book, The 14th Day, JFK and the Aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was published by W. Norton Company on May 15th of 2013. The date of the invasion was April 17th of 1961, as we can see by this line here. And also we can see that there was a steady increase in the weeks after that happens. But what happened to those who went along with it? After the invasion, Kennedy was left asking himself how they couldn't have seen this coming. As a result of this questioning, Kennedy also began to question his trust in the CIA, who did most of the planning for this invasion. The two heads that led the planning of this invasion were Richard Bristol and Allen Dulles. According to Allen Dulles by John Simkin, which appeared in Spartacus Educational on August 2014, Kennedy had a meeting with Bristol where the president took the entire blame for the invasion. However, he added, "In a parliamentary government, I would have to resign. But in this government, I can't. So you and Allen have to go." These firings caused tension between Kennedy and the CIA, as it was believed that Kennedy might even try to get rid of the intelligence agency altogether. So obviously after the invasion, some changes in policies had to take place. Kennedy and his administration had to reassess what they would do with Cuba. This led to a new mission that went by the codename Operation Mongoose. According to the Bay of Pigs invasion and its aftermath, April 1961 to October 1962, which was published by the U.S. Department of State, Operation Mongoose was designed to do what the Bay of Pigs invasion couldn't, and that was to remove the communist Castro regime from the power in Cuba. It also states that the operation was to be a coordinated program of political, psychological, military, sabotage, and intelligence operations, as well as a proposed assassination attempts on key political leaders, including Castro. Overall, the failed invasion was an embarrassment for the United States. However, the successful defense by Cuba only solidified the administration under Fidel Castro, as Brandon had mentioned earlier. With this, Cuba made it known that they would be adopting socialism and create ties with the Soviet Union. This relationship between Cuba and the Soviet Union was vital. It allowed the Soviet Union to send nuclear missiles over to the island of Cuba, which was not very far off the coast of Florida, and point its nuclear missiles directly at the United States. Ultimately, the failed invasion is what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the Cold War had ever gotten to all-out nuclear war. Another policy that took place in 1962 was the economic embargo the United States had placed on Cuba as a result of the feud between the two countries. According to Cuba Sanctions, which was published by the U.S. Department of State, President John F. Kennedy proclaimed an embargo on trade between the United States and Cuba in response to certain actions taken by the Cuban government, and directed the Department of Commerce and the Treasury to implement the embargo, which remains in place today. What this means is that the United States has had no trade with Cuba whatsoever. We still see the impact that this failed invasion has had, even if it was over 50 years ago. It has been said that before Kennedy placed this embargo, he made a mass order of Cuban cigars for himself because he knew that it would be the last of them for him. Now that I've told you about the aftermath of this failure, Dakota is here to tell you about how all of this could have been avoided. Thank you for listening.